obliquely from social and political realities. Whenever I have book events and a Q&A, I can always tell who is studying African literature from their questions. And these are the questions that least interest me. Because of their insistence on everything being post-colonial, because of their deadening preoccupation with theme rather than character, and because of the realization that characters in African novels are not likely to be conceived merely as sources of delight, or that they are too often seen as characters to whom bad colonial things were done. Bad colonial things were done, of course, indeed are still being done. And yet I long for my characters to be seen primarily, as the great Toni Morrison said of her characters, as characters who are unavailable to pity. I agree wholeheartedly that, as Horace wrote, the goal of literature is to instruct and delight. And often the post-colonial studies students do not seem to have the access to the possibilities of the latter, to delight. And I think of this with a kind of wistful resentment when I hear students speak of things like their favorite of Louisa May Alcott's women, or which of Jane Austen's characters was really the most badass. Another consequence of going from the private to the public space with publication is the sudden appearance of labels and the expectations attached to those labels. African writer, black writer, woman writer. The British writer Pat Barker once said that she did not consider herself a woman writer because she did not want to be in the ghetto of women's writing. Does it mean that Pat Barker was ashamed of being a woman? No, but she recognized how heavy with baggage that label, woman's writing, can be. Publication also introduced me to seemingly trivial things as book covers. An acquaintance of mine once said that he would not read Abdul Razak Ghana because he was not interested in magic realism. But he doesn't do magic realism, he said. And this acquaintance then said, well, it looks like it from his book covers. I remember my beloved friend, Inaugural Africa, who told me that men would not read my novel Purple Hibiscus because the cover was too girly. Apparently men don't read girly books. But Binyavanga had a point, which is that studies have shown that men, in general, read books by men, while women, in general, read books by men and women. Publication also introduced me to a strange sort of purity test that seems reserved for African writers. I have often been asked, why don't you live in Africa? That is full-time, because I do live part-time in Nigeria. And these questions come from people who would never have asked a writer like Samuel Beckett why he moved to Paris from Ireland, the country of his birth, or why he chose to write in French. My complaint, by the way, is not about the denial of differences. Obviously, my experience is very different from Samuel Beckett's. On the contrary, my complaint is about the acknowledgement of differences and the insistence that the same value be given to these differences. And the label of African writer brought to me the expectation that one must necessarily be an activist if one is an African writer. There are many writers I admire who were actively activists. But I do not think that a writer must, because of being a writer, also become an activist. I choose to speak out about social issues, not because I'm a writer, but my writing gives me a platform, and social issues matter to me, and so I choose to use that platform to speak. And so I do not think that writers should necessarily speak out on political issues. But I also do not think that art or creativity is a valid reason for evading the responsibilities of citizenship. And those responsibilities are to think clearly, to remain informed, and sometimes to act and to speak. Unlike fiction, non-fiction or activist writing comes to me not as voice or mood, but as emotion, often strong emotion. And most recently, it was a mix of emotions, anger and disappointment, and even a kind of heartbroken hurt that made me feel compelled to write an open letter to President Biden about the Nigerian presidential elections that were held in February. I wrote the public letter because I wanted to tell the story of what happened. And telling the story of what happened has become important in a world so eager to deny and distort even recent history. I wrote it to bear witness. I want to bear witness because I can. And because I can, I believe I must. And finally, I would like to end with these words from Cormac McCarthy. Sometimes it's difficult, but you always have this image of the perfect thing, which you can never achieve, but which you never stop trying to achieve. Thank you.